Chinese government sends to Nigeria official guide on coronavirus treatment. Federal government electricity workers hold conciliation meeting over breaches of agreement. In international news, thousands of Iranians mark revolution anniversary. And in sport, Igalo cleared for Manchester United's Europa trip.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. The Chinese embassy in Nigeria has confirmed its home government has sent to Nigeria and some other countries an official guide document on preventing and controlling the novel coronavirus pneumonia. The treatment guide was provided by China National Health Commission. The Chinese government said this became necessary as death toll on the Chinese mainland crossed more than 1,000. The treatment guide was shared through an official channel with documents including lab test procedure, epidemic updates and risk assessments, diagnosis and treatment protocol, management of close contacts, surveillance and epidemiological investigation. Minister of Labour and Employment Dr. Chris Ngige has held a conciliation meeting on behalf of the federal government with the leadership of the National Union of Electricity Employees after the end of the expiry of the union's 14-day ultimatum on Friday. The union was demanding payments for more than 2,000 former employees of the defunct Power Holding Company of Nigeria. The union had accused the ministry of failing to implement the agreements reached by both parties last December. The meeting has produced an agreement between the two parties to settle all issues within 60 days and to process the remaining persons that have not got their severance pay. A former President Goodluck Jonathan says he sacked EFCC's former chairman, Farida Waziri, in the interest of the nation. Jonathan was reacting to a statement by Waziri in her book titled Farida Waziri One Step Ahead, where she claimed to have been sacked because she went after oil thieves and for her refusal to back down from the probe of one of the masterminds of the fuel subsidy scam. The former president said in a statement Waziri's removal was not personal and that he had retained her when he assumed office despite international calls for her sack. Jonathan says Waziri should have told the path of honor by telling the truth for the benefit of history. The former president has urged Waziri not to continue lamenting the loss of a position that is a public trust and not an entitlement. Kogi State Governor Yaya Bello has commended the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation for taking advantage of the state's enormous economic resources in establishing a biofuel refinery in the state. Leader of an inspection team to the refinery site, Danjuma Yakubu, says a soil test had been carried out at the proposed site for the refinery in Alakpe. Yakubu also revealed the state government, the NNPC, and private investors had also finalized agreements to establish a crop processing zone at Alakpe and Ikebunu in the Kababunu local government area of the state. Nigeria's Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, has come under fire on social media after he made public the federal government's intentions to secure a loan he said would help upgrade Nigeria's broadcasting infrastructure, and also Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, to the likes of the American news network, CNN. The minister made this public when he appeared before the Senate Committee on Local and Foreign Loans to defend the borrowing plan of his ministry. The ministry is applying for $500 million as part of the loan requested by President Muhammadu Buhari in the external borrowing plan for infrastructure development in the country. Mohammed says if the fund were approved, NTA could be upgraded to be at par with CNN because Nigeria already has the manpower and technology. Some Nigerians say the country has wasted money on many things since 1960, and if the $500 million loan for NTA goes through, it would rank in the top 5 most wasteful uses of money ever in the history of television. They say a poor country like Nigeria has better use for $500 million. Others question some Nigerians who are upset that the federal government is planning to invest in Nigeria's largest television network after spending huge sums to digitize it. Trial of convener of #RevolutionNow Omoyele Sowore and his co-defendant Olawale Bakare will resume on Wednesday in the Federal High Court, Abuja. Sowore and Bakare were released from custody in December. Showore's lawyer Femi Falana had filed a motion ex parte before Justice Eku to demand for Showore's unconditional release from DSS detention in pursuance of the release order made by Justice Ojukwu last November. The matter could not be heard and it was later reassigned to Justice Ahmed Mohammed.
Coming up, African stories. African Union determined to find an end to the Libyan conflicts. And later, international news. It's Iran's revolution anniversary and thousands turn out to mark the special day.
Get ready for the greatest artist of all time.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the phenomenon, top vocalist of this generation. It's the legend. It's...
We're going up, we're going high. Get ready for the greatest artist of all time.
Whether in your house, at your office, on your phone or online, we are there. We have the facts behind the headlines. We cut to the chase with the news you really need. We cover every angle. We are the bigger, better news network. We are African News Network. ANN. Watch ANN News on MITV from a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to African stories. For years, the Libyan crisis has festered and African Union has taken half-spirited steps to resolve it. Now the country is on the verge of a permanent split and the continental body has awakened and vowed to do whatever it takes to end the crisis in the country. Daniel Arapmoy reports from Addis Ababa.
The African Union, in partnership with the Arab League, has vowed to spare no efforts in ending the Libyan crisis. African heads of state resolved in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa to extricate Libya from the current crisis, calling for inclusive national reconciliation among the Libyan people.
I want to welcome the decision of the High-Level Committee on Libya for the speedy launching of the initiative of peace and reconciliation in Libya, in harmony with the decisions of the Berlin Conference and in conformity with the principles of African solution to African problem, far from the external influence which have perilous agendas for Africa.
During the AU summit, outgoing chairperson and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi raised concerns about the Libyan crisis, which he says risks increasing terrorism and extremism on the African continent unless strong measures are taken by the African Union. The summit pledged to consolidate the existing truce and reaching out for a permanent arrangements for a ceasefire. They also agreed to address all forms of external interference in the internal affairs of Libya and implement the security, political and economic roadmap agreed to in the Berlin process.
Africa has constantly reminded that there is no military solution to this problem. Its preference for a political process which is authentically and genuinely inclusive, and ownership by the Libyans of their own national destiny within the framework of their continental organization.
The United Nations, on its part, agreed to support any form of mediation, as long as it will lead to finding lasting solution to the crisis in Libya. The African Union says it's committed to finding a lasting solution to the current crisis in Libya. The continental body says no amount of external influence will deter its efforts in trying to resolve the political impasse in Tripoli.
African Development Bank has reported an encouraging economic news to the African Union at its 33rd summit in Addis Ababa. The bank says the continent's economies are growing well and higher than the global average. The bank's projects a steady rise in growth in Africa and this year and next. Again, we turn to reporter Daniel Robmoy in Addis Ababa.
The 2020 Africa's economic growth outlook indicates stabilization in growth, which is expected to pick up but remains below historical highs. Leading the way are 6 economies among the world's 10 fastest growers: Rwanda, Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Tanzania and Benin. The African Union Commission says growth fundamentals are also improving, with a gradual shift from private consumption toward investment and exports.
This report, which analyzes the policies of a productive transformation, is designed to serve as a practical support of African leaders to achieve the targets of Agenda 2063.
For the first time in a decade, investment accounted for more than half the continent's growth, with private consumption accounting for less than 1/3.
Our desire, therefore, is that the policy recommendations that are made will be implemented and taken into account by the heads of state as they move their economies forward.
Africa's economic outlook continues to brighten. Its GDP growth, estimated at 3.4% for 2019, is projected to accelerate to 3.9% in 2020 and to 4.1% in 2021. But despite Africa's solid growth performance, only about 1/3 of the countries achieved inclusive growth, reducing both poverty and inequality. The African Union says that to make Africa's growth more inclusive, countries need to deepen structural reforms to diversify their productive base, build resilience to extreme weather events, and adopting climate-smart agricultural techniques. To address inequality in education, the outlook appeals for progressive universalism in education spending, setting high priorities for the poor and disadvantaged for basic education where social returns are highest.
The Kenyan government has now taken over one of the hospitals in Nairobi to be equipped as a proactive measure against the coronavirus outbreak in the country. Cabinet Secretary Sikili Karuke says the 120-bed capacity Magathi Hospital Fertility will act as a quarantine center for any suspected coronavirus case. The country received the virus reagent test kits from the World Health Organization on Saturday. Already, the Kenyan government has ruled out any attempts to evacuate Kenyans still in Wuhan, the epicenter of the virus, even with calls by Kenyan students in the affected region who would rather be flown home. The government says China is the best place for them at the moment. Kenya has more than 90 students in Wuhan, where the virus has claimed more than 500 lives.
When we return, international news. Thousands of Iranians mark revolution anniversary. And later, sport. Igalo cleared for Manchester United's Europa trip.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. On the international scene, Iran marked an important day in its history on Tuesday. Tens of thousands of Iranians filled the streets to remember the 41st anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. As they marked this day, they could not put on the back burner the escalating tensions between the country and the United States. Rallies took place in many cities across the country, and marchers held placards, some of which read "Death to America" and "Death to Israel." Just a month ago, the two countries almost began a full war after the U.S. killed a top Iranian military commander, Qasem Soleimani, in a drone attack in Baghdad. Iran retaliated a few days later by lobbing several missiles into a U.S. base in Iraq, but all seems to have quieted down some. As part of yesterday's anniversary, Iran put on display its missiles, and the state television showed foul footage of missile launches in underground missile storage facilities as part of its anniversary coverage. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said on Monday it has no intention of attacking its neighbors with a missile program. President Trump is trying again in his new budget proposal to sharply cut foreign aid by 21%. The Trump administration is requesting $44 billion for the program, compared with $56 billion that was enacted in fiscal 2020. Some lawmakers are already writing the plan's obituary. They say it will not sail through on Capitol Hill, especially in this election year. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Eliot Engel says such a proposal is heading to the wastebasket whenever it's reached the House. The Trump administration says $40 billion for foreign aid is still substantial out of a total budget of nearly $5 trillion. Some foreign affairs and military experts have written to the House warning of the risk for longer and deadlier military operations if foreign aid is cut so deeply. One said with such a cut, some places would see more violence, poor governance, and an upsurge in illegal migration and refugee problems. Death toll from the novel coronavirus epidemic has exceeded 1,000. With this news, the top two health officials in central China's Hubei province, which is the epicenter of the outbreak, have been lost their positions. Communist Party boss of Hubei's Provincial Health Commission, Zhang Jin, and the commission's director, Liu Yingyun, have been dismissed. The firings came one day after another 103 deaths were reported in Hubei province. Millions of residents have been under lockdown and complaints are getting louder now of food shortages. Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, says on Monday there are now cases of concern in people contracting the disease without even visiting China. Also on Monday, Britain declared the virus a serious and imminent threat to public health. 4 new cases were reported in the UK. On that day, bringing to 8 the total number of cases in Britain. The whole world is now looking at coronavirus as a shared responsibility. Many countries, even not so rich ones, have been sending donations to China to help in the fight against the disease. And now, U.S. companies have joined the donor list. Reporter Mark New is in Beijing.
In San Leandro, California, volunteers from the nonprofit group MedShare are busy packing. The group collects surplus medical supplies and used equipment from U.S. hospitals and manufacturers. This shipment is headed to China.
Oh, it's tragic. A lot of lives being lost. The equipment we're sending now is protective.
I even worked in Wuhan and opened a hotel there in Wuhan many years ago. This is the only way for me to stay in touch with China is by doing what I'm doing today.
1.8 million of these masks and 80,000 of these isolation gowns for healthcare workers will be headed in the shipment to China. These are all medical supplies that without MedShare's help could easily have ended up in a landfill.
I actually lived 4 years in China, and so this is very personal for me. I still have a number of friends, a number of colleagues that are in Shanghai.
The shipment is a team effort. UPS is providing free shipping, and the medical supplies company Henry Schein donated the masks. The Coca-Cola company gave MedShare a $500,000 grant that's making it all possible. Coca-Cola Greater China President Kurt Ferguson lives in Shanghai.
So imagine if this crisis would occur in the U.S. When you had Thanksgiving and Christmas combined, and that's how it really tugs at your heartstrings. That wow, people that want to be celebrating, they're so excited to get home, and to have this happen in the middle of it is just so devastating.
What I feel at the moment can only be characterized by one word: it's gratefulness.
While praising the efforts of the companies involved in the donation, Consul General Wang also criticized the U.S. government's decision to restrict foreign nationals from entering the U.S. from China.
I would say that the proclamation of the suspension on entry into the United States is a kind of an overreaction, which is not helpful to the efforts on the ground to fight against the outbreak. And, it's not in conformity with the recommendations and advices of the WHO.
Company representatives from today's event emphasized that the fight against the new coronavirus is a global problem that requires a global effort to contain and defeat the outbreak.
Up next, sports. Igalo cleared for Manchester United's Europa trip. Please stay with us.
Welcome back. This is ANN News in Sport. 29-year-old Super Eagles forward Anthony Nwakeme has received a £100,000 bonus from Transobo after contributing 19 goals to the team this season. Nwakeme activated the clause in his contract after scoring 11 goals and providing 8 assists this season in 31 games across all competitions. Since joining the Turkish club 2 years ago, he has scored 22 goals and contributed 16 assists. Striker Odion Ighalo will be able to travel with Manchester United for the Europa League tie next week, despite having to miss the club's training camp in Marbella over the coronavirus alert. Ighalo was left in Manchester when the United squad flew to Spain last Saturday amid fears he might not be allowed back in the UK if border controls were tightened this week. The Nigerian striker is among the travellers from China to the UK being monitored for 14 days. The 2-week period runs out on Sunday. United have confirmed Ighalo will be free to travel to Belgium to face them next Thursday after being added to the Europa League squad. That is in the news this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on these and other breaking stories, visit our website, annafrica.news. Conversation continues on our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Have a pleasant evening.